So friends, in the first part of the discussion, Dr. Bajaj talked about the questions that Manipuri poetry faces at the level of culture and at the level of social reality. And in the second part, I'm sure she'll be focusing upon specific poems by this poet who started well, with his association with art, and then took dimensions that would raise humanist issues for consideration of the readers and the viewers, so far as we are concerned. So let's have more of the questions, more of the concerns of this poet, and the poetic feats that he is able to perform through poetry, through writing. And over to you, Professor Bajaj, again, and let's see.
Thank you, Professor Anprakash. Now, I will of course talk about some of the themes in Ibopishak's poetry that you find. So, one very important idea that you find in his works is that there is a rejection of realistic projections. Realism is is found to be ill-equipped to deal with the problems that society is facing, and so you find that because he was very heavily influenced by modernist ideas, also by the art forms such as cubism, surrealism, as I mentioned earlier in my previous lecture also, that there is a kind of a surrealist, which means an approach to go beyond realism in order to project reality. So there is an inclination towards surrealism in his poetry, but along with that there is also a lot of the absurdist irony that you find in there. So very high, it's a kind of dark irony, but it dwells on the absurd. So absurdism, surrealism, rejection of realism in many ways, these are some of the things that you find in the poems of Ibopishak. Again, it's a poetry of witness, but also at the same poetry of survival. Poetry as a way through which you can find harmony in society, but at the same time poetry that calls a spade spade. So there is experimentation in form, but at the same time it is a poetry that is trying to register the lives of people at the time. Now the third thing that you find, these were of course aesthetic categories, you also find a lot of the projection of a lot of contradictions that society faced at the time. For instance, there are a lot of paradoxes and riddles that you find in Ibopishak's poetry. I will come to the riddles and the paradoxes that you see, how one thing connects with the other, how he creates that. For instance, the juxtaposition of flowers and guns together, or nature and cars on street, the bazaar and the life of the bazaar. So, there is hustle bustle, but also a kind of commercialism that he finds oppressive. As a poet, he wants to go back to nature. There is a kind of that kind of image. So there is oppression, there is surveillance, all those there is extortion, there is violence and addiction. Those are the kind of issues that his poems also take up, in the course of his writing. You find them to be there. Now, I was discussing with you this poem DALI, HUSSAIN, or Odor of Dream and Color of Wind, and in my previous lecture I mentioned how the first stanza opens this space for disconnected images, and the poets take on materialism and commercialism that is on the rise, around him. As I move on to into the poem and we go into the idea of riddle, as I was talking about, he uses a lot of the folk element also, but what he does is he disrupts it or distorts the folk element also. So there is distortion of image. If you remember, if you know of say Picasso's work, you know that there are all these cubists would reject reality by putting up flat images. So by putting up these two-dimensional images. So there is a kind of a movement of disruption and also distortion, which you find also in Ibopishak's works. Now the second stanza of this same poem talks about this kind of a seer figure, and he says, "True, the poet says, leaves do not move without a fleeting wind. True, I also say, even if the wind blows or not, even if it rains or not, leaves never move if there are no leaves on the bare tree." So you see, there is a kind of a saying, but then that saying is turned on its head. There is a saying that leaves do not move without a wind. So you need the wind, that the wind will come and the leaves will move. There is a sense of hope there, but then it is accompanied by a sense of despair, because he says that the wind may blow or not, the rains may come or not, but things are not going to change if there are no leaves on the tree. If the tree is bare, then how is there going to be any change.
You have been such a great admirer of Emily Dickinson, but you can see that at work in this poem.
Right.
The two opposites,
Right.
and both mean something, and yet, you know,
Yeah.
there is questions.
So this poem is very dramatic from a very aesthetic point of view. It's a very dramatic poem. In fact, he would write prose poems also. For instance, this other poem, the Land of Half Humans, is a very prose poem. You know, where he's discussing a dystopia. Right, in that poem. I'll come to that. Basically, he talks about that dystopic reality or a dystopia where people are living in a headless manner. Now, headless manner, of course, suggests they are living without thinking. So, you know, they've given up on rationality, they've given up on their mind altogether. And they're living a sort of, they're living like zombies.
For the beginners and the viewers, would you explain dystopia? It's a new term.
Yes, what I mean by dystopia is as against utopia that builds an ideal society and visualizes or fantasizes about a beautiful world. Dystopia basically talks about a kind of fatal reality or a reality that is about doomsday. It's like the worst kind possible, fantasizing about the future. So in dystopia, you are imagining a world that is filled with chaos and is a nightmare, to be honest.
And you lose hope?
It is despair, of course. So, yeah, but it's not like he's a sentimental poet. You see, he's very sharp with his images. It's almost like there is a sense of derision involved there, you know, a sense of cynicism also exists in his work, because he's just not able to see, and he's just so disgusted by all the events, you know, that he also makes use of scatological reference in that poem. So I think it's the kind of despair mixed with a sense of complete hopelessness, you know, I mean despair and hopelessness in that sense, but a kind of complete cynicism in that sense. You know, there seems to be no hope possible.
Is it not positive cynicism?
It is positive cynicism in the sense that he's not given up on it. You know, even when he says that it is completely impossible and it is despair and, you know, very little is possible, he still seems to find through poetry a means through which to express it, even when he thinks it is impossible to express this kind of reality. And because it is impossible to speak of this reality, and in the poem, The Land of Half Humans, he says that people think we are, you know, we have a perfect way of living and we have the best, there is no poverty, there is justice all over, you know. So, but the world that he's presenting is in complete opposition to what people believe in and what the narrative is, or what the larger media narrative is, that, you know, we live in a perfect world and there is no poverty and everybody is happy. But what he presents is such a disgusting picture of reality that obviously the narrative goes against the actual depiction. So I think he's using that way through which to convey to people. Also, I think he's also referring in many ways how the mainstream views marginalized, peripheral, disturbed areas as places either very demonic or as perfect. You know, he says, and both are prejudices about that place. I think that's also there somewhere when he's depicting these images. Now, you know, about surveillance, as I said, there is a constant sense of paranoia, you know, or an apprehension that people there, because you always feel you're being watched, you always feel that there is always surveillance all over. So there is a sense of deep-seated suspicion also. You can't trust people. So obviously there is no normalcy in that sense. Think of this particular phrase where he says, one knows man's thoughts from his speech. As for the mind's words of a tight-lipped man, one can read them from his eyes. That is why, to conceal my mind, I put on dark glasses.
Oh.
Again,
so literal and so very suggestive.
So, exactly. So, you know, there are two planes at which it works. At a very literal plane, which is flat, two-dimensional, doesn't mean anything. But if you were to read the suggestion and the meaning that is connoted, it is hard-hitting. You know, so he says, and let me say, one knows man's thoughts from his speech. As for the mind's words of a tight-lipped man, one can read them from his eyes. That is why, to conceal my mind, I put on dark glasses. Again, so that even the glasses cannot read, I keep my two eyes shut. Men who close their eyes can be seen inside a lockup or inside a sacred temple. So either you have attained enlightenment and you're sitting inside a temple, or your ideas are too dangerous for society and you have been put behind
It's a very
lockup.
difficult idea.
Yes.
And presented in difficult terms.
Yes. You know, he has a poem which is titled "I Want to Be Killed by an Indian Bullet." It's a poet and there are these group of agents who come in and they say, "We are here to shoot you." And he's like, "Why are you shooting me?" He says, "Because your ideas are not good for society." And he says that, "Okay, but I'm a nationalist." He says, "We don't believe it." And he said, "Okay, because I'm a nationalist and you are here to kill me, what gun, where is this gun made in?" And this one says that it's made in China. "Where's the bullet come from?" He says, "It has come from some other place." He said, "No, kill me with a gun that is Indian made and buy a bullet that is Indian made because I'm a nationalist." So you see how the entire, it's so ironic, the whole scene. So, you know, it gets connected with the idea of surveillance and ending in a lockup, and also how art is dangerous.
See the subtle part is there. He wants to be an Indian.
Yeah.
And therefore he doesn't want to die.
Die.
Imagine this.
Right. Yeah. In another poem he says, Manipur, I will not die for you. You know, why should I die for you? Because there are people who are doing bad to you, they should die. Why should I die? So sort of a thing. So in a way, you know, he's using poetry to, he's actually suggesting that ideas are dangerous and you can land in a lockup, but in an interview he says poetry is not a weapon. So you know how in fact his own speech might go against what he's
very
doing.
Honest voice.
Yes, very honest.
Trying to come to terms with reality.
Right.
So that sometime in future everybody will be tranquil, everybody will be calm. It's that kind of poetry.
But there is a kind of dangerous calm that he's also referring.
Yes. No, but there is hope.
There is hope.
Hope
the man, otherwise he would not be writing so much.
Yes.
You know, he's not. He's using. He's finding ways to convey this reality. Otherwise, he would not waste, I think, so much time on it.
Why should he write then?
Why should he write then if there is no hope? So think of this another image that he builds. Again, you know, series of images. You just need to put them together and the narrative forms. Now, this image is. He's asking this question: which is more fragrant? Which is more fragrant? The reports of guns or the scent of flowers? The sound of guns lies on the nose. The odor of flowers on the tips of flowers. You know, so in a way, he's attaching. What he's doing is he's using, like he did with the title. He's using a sense perception and adding it on a thing that does not have that sense perception. So disconnected images, but also disconnected imagery, right?
But hidden connections at the same time.
Right, that the sound of gun lies on the nose, not ears. So sound is not getting connected to the ear, sound is getting connected to the nose. The odor is not getting connected to the nose, the odor is getting connected to other things, to the tongue.
All these different senses reside in the human personality.
Right, but they are interconnected, but he's saying they are not directly connected. So reality is not directly to be understood. The only way you can understand reality is through an indirect way.
It's a philosophical, political conundrum.
Right, true. And it is a conundrum, you've said it right. Now, look at this image that he creates. It's the 5th stanza of the poem. And he says, and there is narrative here, and yet, again, to be decoded. One day, wanting to own a peepal tree, I climbed atop a rich man's tall building.
Poor people has been completely taken over by the rich man.
Yeah. One day, wanting to own a peepal tree, I climbed atop a rich man's tall building and entering his bathroom, looked for one. I like peepal trees very much. I would like to see every citizen of Imphal walking with a small peepal tree growing on his head.
Remarkable.
Yeah.
And so nature loving, so tradition loving of the different kinds.
But think of it, you see, now this reminds me of the image of DALI with a woman who has a head of roses, of flowers in place of the head, right? That's one image. It's an exact image. He says, I want the head to be replaced by a peepal tree. And when you look up the peepal tree, there is Buddha, Gautam Buddha actually sat under a peepal tree to gain enlightenment. So what is he really asking? He's asking all the citizens to actually become enlightened or become aware or start thinking.
Or Mukti Bodh, turning peepal tree into Bargad tree, under which lots of people play and enjoy themselves.
Yes. So, but you see, what he's trying to suggest here is that the DALI image of the woman with the headless woman with the place in the place of the head there is the bouquet of flowers, and the peepal tree, suggesting that I want people to think and use their minds. But peepal tree, he's go back to the image So there are two images which are sub-images within the larger image. But go back to the main image. He says one day wanting to own a people tree. Why does he want to own a people tree? Does he want knowledge or does he want money? Is it a reference to the money tree, or the fact that money grows on trees? That kind of logic, is he using that? He says why does he want to own a people tree, and why does he climb a rich man's tall building to get there? And why did he enter the bathroom of that man? He says, I looked for one. And then he said, then inside that bathroom, I found my wife leaning, half her body, waist above, turning into a people, waist below, her body without clothes. I was not surprised. I was not worried. I did not cry. Girish Karnad, my wife metamorphosed into a Chelluvi. How can I claim now that I like people trees? Unquote.
Yes, interwoven, all these things, from different parts of India, from different parts of the world.
Right, using folk.
Using folk.
So, just to tell the viewers, Chelluvi is the title of this Kannada film, which was directed by Girish Karnad, and it takes up that Karnataka folk tale. It's the name of a flower girl who would turn into a flowering tree. If you remember, even A.K. Ramanujan has spoken about this and written, has translated this. So, there is this girl who had this gift of turning into a tree, and if you poured water, then she would become the woman, she would turn back into a woman. Now, a girl who has this kind of beautiful ability to turn into a flowering tree, that has been corrupted and maligned. And, he's talking about this kind of moral depravity. You see, and he's talking about wife. He's not talking about any woman. He says, my wife metamorphosed into something. Now, in a rich man's building, he's also entering, he's trying to steal it. That's why he's entering it. The tall building, he's not going through the door, he's trying to climb it, which means he's morally depraved, because he's trying to steal something from the rich man. And in the rich man's house, his own wife stands in the bathroom, obviously compromised morally. And what is the nature of family? What is the nature of most sacred relationships in life? So he's talking about this kind of moral decline and depravity which is found everywhere, and also suggesting that that there is no sense of morality remaining anywhere. And half her body, he says, has turned into a people tree. Again, the reference to Dali's woman comes back. Who has a head who has a bouquet of roses. Here the wife's body, half her body has turned into a flowering tree, and the half is without clothes. So there is nudity, there is a kind of very bold image that he's creating here. How would you respond to the? And he's not surprised. He says, I was not surprised, I was not worried. He almost accepted it.
I think he's using the technique of the dream, which is a combination of so many things.
And yes, very true.
Goes across regions, goes across time segments, and it remains in the present because the person is watching the dream straight away. So it's airy, it's ethereal, and it's at the same time very brutal.
And also very hard-hitting. It just leaves you very shocked in that. He has another poem of a similar kind where he's talking about the wife. It's titled My Frequently Married Wife.
What does it mean?
Yeah. So, and he evokes a similar issue, and he says the wife here signifies, the bazaar, and he calls it the bazaar of darkness. So one doesn't know whether he's talking about the bazaar as wife or the wife as bazaar. And you understand, he says this. So what finally emerges is that there is a helplessness that the poet witnesses, which is to do with the prostitution of the beloved land. The Manipur as his family, Manipur as intimate, as seen as a woman, as wife.
A moral mix-up.
Yeah, no, Manipur as wife, and that has been, that has been completely corrupted because of the bazaars around. And then he goes on to talk about the stink of the bazaar, etc. So, so one doesn't know whether he's talking about the wife or sacred relationships that have turned ugly, or the life of the bazaar which has completely corrupted the land of, and he's talking about the death of humanity. And this angle of the death of humanity, he actually takes up in the poem also, The Land of Half Humans, that I mentioned earlier. There's a sense of disillusionment, and the poet acts as witness. You see, always there is a sense of witness in his poetry. So he acts as a witness who's seen the death of humanity in his own region. And which is why this death of humanity is created, given another form in The Land of the Half Humans, where he's talking about these nameless creatures. There are people there who resemble human beings, but they are not human beings, because their ears can turn into wings and they can fly because they are just heads, they don't have bodies. And then he says that it is symbolic, so basically he has this image where there are creatures who look like human beings, but for 6 months bodies live, for the other 6 months only the heads live. So you see, it is a symbolic, or it's symbolic of the destruction of the world, and hence dystopia, but also symbolic of the destruction of the old value system that no more exists today, because of this kind of replete sort of commercial activity, and how conflict is also weaponized and made profit out of it. So profit is created out of it. So the whole culture has in a way seen a kind of decline. So in the poem The Land of Half Humans, you find that the head and the body live alternately every 6 months, and the headless body actually lives in very harsh conditions, and the bodiless head lives very happily. Now when I read this poem, somehow I was reminded of The Time Machine by Wells. Where this person goes, the time traveler, when he goes, he finds that he's entered the future where there are Morlocks and all, you remember, right? So again, giving a very dystopic kind of future. A place where
traveling through time and then coming back and seeing that the world is topsy-turvy.
No, the world is worse in the future. That's what Wells said, in that there are people who have come, there are people who are living in very brutal conditions. And in this poem is again very hard-hitting. Of course, we don't have enough time. How long is this poem? Not very long, actually, just 2 pages, 2.5 pages, I think. But packed, with lot of images, because throughout he's talking about and here you see he's talking about the inequalities in society, because he says that there are these people who are living like brutes. They just keep working. When the body is working, he's saying the body is just also working constantly, because there is labor and there is mechanical work that keeps coming up, and then the head is when the head is living, this bodiless head lives very happily, because it's not using its mind. So in a way he's talking about this irrational, indifferent generation, perhaps, that has entered.
What are the years of evolution? When did he live and die? Is he alive?
Yeah, he is very much alive, yes. He was born in 1948. So he's alive, and he's published over 6 volumes of collections of poetry, and he
all in English?
No, in Manipuri. He has been translated into English by Robin S. Gangom, who is again a Manipuri poet. So he's also a Sahitya Academy award winner. And but his active years of poetry writing begin from 1965 onwards. Like he has been anthologized in several collections as well. So he seriously pursued writing from 1964 onwards. But he's very much there. And there are a lot of interviews, but he was born in 1948. So he's
quite senior.
Yeah, right.
He has seen the entire span of India's evolution as
post-independence, from the lens of the Northeast. I think this is what he portrays over here. So the idea is that he's able to see the kind of problems that exist in his region. And
but Hindi poets of this generation have not talked about reality this way. So
it's a very bleak, satirical reality.
In Hindi, there is no.
I somehow feel that maybe that the age of disillusionment, the 1960s, the period of Mohbang, probably somehow is also. It's also the period where you have in Manipuri poetry the aggression coming in. The young angry poets in the 60s come up and they write, in 1970 or 71 there was this collection of Storm, where all these Northeast poets came up and they wrote their truth, so to speak. And all of them, it was just, people criticized it for this kind of overt sort of anger. It was filled with anger and this kind of radical poetry. But 80s onwards, you see a kind of stabilizing of that anger. And in place of anger, there is this kind of absurdist, surrealistic sort of experimentation.
What is happening in the last phase of his poetry, which he is living in at the moment?
It's this only, the 2003 version, The Land of Half Humans, for instance, etc. So he's writing these. He's also written this There are several other poems which are very good. But again, talking about this particular phase, he's writing a lot about the commercialism of the age, or the kind of commercial activities that are going on. The kind of and the stench associated with it. The stench associated with the bazaar life, the commercial, like the old Manipuri, the old value system is lost, and with it also a kind of idealism, or and there is a sense of indifference that he talks about, in this kind of headless generation that he speaks of, that he's trying to instill ideas, but there are no, remember that instance where I said that the wind will come, when wind will take the leaves away. He says there are no leaves. Now leaves also suggest the new generation. There is a large scale migration that has happened from northeast to various other regions, and so if there are no young people to to take this kind of discourse forward, then the poet also sees a kind of bleak reality, that the poet witnesses here. So I think there is a sense of, from 1994 onwards, for instance, his collection The Ghost and the Mask, he's turning towards this kind of bleak situation where the old life has gone and the new generation is unwilling to take up, because they also want a sense of normal life. So they've all left the region and migrated to other places for better life and education. So in a way, there is a sense of the irrational, indifferent sort of generation has taken over.
He remains stuck to Manipur?
Yeah.
And
basically.
And writes still in the Manipuri language?
Yes, he writes in
He has not tried his hand at English?
I'm not aware if he has really written in English, but I think mostly he's written in Manipur. And
so Gangom has done a great service by translating this.
Yes, absolutely. It's Gangom has really brought him to the English audience, and
as you were talking, I was constantly comparing it with the poetry written elsewhere in the Indian languages, and I find this is a unique kind of example.
Very, very. And so self-aware,
yes.
And also aware of the problems that lie within. He's not just talking about people outside or the state agents, etc. He's talking about his own people who have turned corrupt, who have worked against, who have become indifferent, who have become irrational, who are becoming dehumanized. So it's not like he's just he's not victimizing particularly the people per se. He's also saying that they are at fault too. So I think it's a kind of an honest projection from the poet.
Well, friends, it has been wonderful, listening to Dr. Bajaj regarding this poet who has been critiquing life, society, everything in his poetry, and very honestly. And this honest voice, is supposed to be a kind of point of inspiration for the poets elsewhere in other languages. And I'm sure that this poet requires more appreciation, more understanding, and whenever possible, a different kind of imagination that he himself carries in his poetry. So thanks a lot to you and viewers. I'm sure that this confrontation with this poetry will open up many questions, many windows in our minds, and will make us look, differently about the world in which we live, at the national level, at the international level, at the local level. Wherever we will belong to, and we have our languages. So thanks a lot, and viewers, I'm sure you would have enjoyed it. Thank you.